Since Newton's first law has to do with balanced force and unbalanced force, I'd first like to start by talking about force. Force is a vector. It is measured in newtons, which is capital N, and vectors have magnitude and direction. Well, there's one way to describe a vector, and that is by putting the tail, which you see in the lower left of the vector, at 0, 0, and then the tip will completely describe the vector. Balanced force occurs when the sum of all of the vectors acting on an object is 0. That means the net force is 0, and you see a Greek symbol, sigma, here, which also indicates that you add all the vectors acting on an object. So you have balanced force when the sum of the vectors is 0. So I have objects that are shown as little black lines, and for each of these objects you have vectors that are the same magnitude but opposite directions, and so the net force on each of these little black dot objects is 0. These are all examples of balanced force, where the net force is 0. This is a much more complicated example. So if I look at the first two vectors going to the right and the left, they're both 4 in length. They are balanced. If I look at the up and down vectors marked with an X, they're both 3 in length. They are also balanced, and I think you can see that the vectors going up and to the left, and up and to the right and down and to the left are also balanced because they're in opposite directions but the same magnitude. So all tails are located on the object that they act on, and it appears that this is a complicated example of some object that has balanced force acting on it. Now here are 3 examples of unbalanced force. Number 1, anytime there's a single force acting on an object, it is unbalanced. Number 2, I think it's pretty obvious from this that we do not have equal magnitude, opposite direction vectors on the object, so there is a net force on this. It's not 0. And in example number 3, the vector going downward has a magnitude maybe of 5 newtons, while the vector going upward only has a magnitude of 4 newtons. So again, that would be an unbalanced force with a net force going down as 1 newton. Newton's first law is sometimes referred to as the law of inertia. The first law states that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Objects at rest have a velocity of 0 meters per second, and if there is no net force acting on the object, it has an acceleration of 0 meters per second squared. So they stay at rest. You can figure this out from your kinematics equations. This is an example of what's called static equilibrium. It's at rest, and it has no net force acting on it. Objects in motion. Well, objects in motion don't have a velocity of 0 meters per second, but they have an acceleration of 0 meters per second squared. And Newton's first law says they stay in motion with the same speed and in the same direction. This is an example of dynamic equilibrium. Still has a net force of 0, but it maintains its speed and direction. Inertia. Inertia is the resistance of an object that an object has to a change in its state of motion. The more inertia an object has, the more mass an object has. Mass is measured in kilograms. The mass of an object is strictly dependent on how much stuff is in the object. It is independent of location. So a person with a mass of 60 kilograms on Earth has that same mass on the moon. I hope that helps, with Newton's first law.